All right, so I thought I would do a really quick mid-month update for June of the Make Stuff 2021 challenge, in which I'm trying to complete all 5 of my unfinished creative projects by the end of this year. This month, I've been working on trying to finalize the map tiles and the monster cards for uh, the board game. And the board game is shaping up to be a tile-based dungeon crawler. Last month, I built all of these prototype components and did a lot of sort of random play testing, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. I ended up writing the rule book, which is around here somewhere. Yeah, I got a 20-page rule book here, which I'm gonna have to rewrite a couple times to really get it in the ballpark of functional. And then this month, I bought a square sketchbook because I'm basically working on tile designs, and the tiles are square. And so all of my design stuff for this board game is going to go in this sketchbook. And what I did here on this first spread was just try to lay out as many different tile types as I could think of and try to figure out like how they're all going to connect. You know, if I'm going to go with a 4x4 grid on each tile, which it looks like that's how it's shaping up, you know, how are the connections going to happen? The connections won't be right in the middle of each tile edge. So then there has to be some logic to determine how each one of these tiles is going to connect to the other one. And do edge corners need to line up when you lay the tiles? And so those are all decisions that I'm trying to make, answers I'm trying to come up with. But I do think that the non-uniform exits for each tile are a little more fun than just having exits in the center of each tile. So that's kind of why I've gone with a 4x4 grid instead of a 3x3 grid, because I like that the passages that exit each tile are offset, and it just creates a little more interest. Now, it probably means that the corners for each tile are not always going to line up, but I did some testing of that, and that doesn't really bother me at all. So I think this is the whole scheme that I've come up with. And originally I was going to have like castles and temples and stuff, but I think I'm going to keep version 1 of this game simple, and I'm just going to have like dungeons and caves. The whole first edition of this game is just going to be underworld exploration, either in man-made passages and chambers or natural passages and chambers. I'm going to have dungeon tiles that actually have little holes in the floor or the wall that bust into a cave system. So you can actually flow from a man-made dungeon to a natural cave system and back again. And I think I'm going with 24 double-sided tiles for each. So I'm going to have 24 dungeon tiles and 24 cave tiles double-sided. So that's going to provide a lot of variation. Then I was working on monsters. I ended up doing a couple pages of monsters. There's 15 on each page. So I mocked up like 60 different monsters. Some of these I'm definitely not going to use. Some of them I really like. So my goal is to do 48 monsters. So out of these 60 designs, I think I'll definitely be able to get, 48 or 50 that I like with some iterating. And so I basically just need to take these thumbnails and take it to the next level, make them better, and write up the data types for each monster and figure out like how the AI is going to work for the monster cards. And then I started getting into the procedural map generation and what that's going to look like. And one of my goals for this game is to keep the entire footprint of the game when you're playing it down below like 24 by 24 inches. So I want this whole game, when you're playing it, to fit in a space that's 2 feet by 2 feet, primarily because, like I've complained about a lot, I think a lot of the big dungeon crawl games are just too sprawly, take up too much table space. And I want this game, especially since it's a solitaire game, to be fairly compact. I don't think that says anything about the depth or complexity of the game. I just have like strong ideas about what I want the aesthetic and what I want the scope and scale of the actual components to be. And so I was trying to figure out, well, how big would an average dungeon be for this game? And I think the average standard normal mode of play is going to include 12 tiles. So you'll randomly draw 12 tiles from the deck of tiles, and here I started to do some math. So there's always going to be an entrance tile, and then there's always going to be junction tiles. A hub is actually a tile that you can exit all 4 directions from, and then a junction is a tile that you can exit 3 directions from. I think what I ended up with was, entrance tiles, hub tiles, junction tiles, chamber tiles, and passage tiles. So the chambers are really just like dead ends, but those are where threat levels increase. Those are where you have like the bigger encounters, and those are where you find like the bigger loot. So the chambers, or the sort of dead ends, are very important. And even though this dungeon doesn't look very big, the thing is you have to backtrack. Like another thing I really wanted this game to have was the notion that you go into the dungeon, you go into the location, you find location A, you find location B, location C, location D. You get to the end of each route, and potentially, or maybe you just go to the end of a couple of them, and then you're running out of light and you need to get out of there. But the important thing is you have to get back to the entrance. So junctions in this game matter, the hubs matter. Finding your way to the end of each route matters, because you're going to unlock treasures, but also unlock hazards. And so then I was coming up with like kind of a flowchart way to figure all this out, and then I just worked out some basic designs. So this is a very standard design. This one has 13 tiles, and so 1 entrance, 1 hub, 2 junctions, 4 passages, and 5 chambers. And then here is a standard 12 tile configuration. So the first game that you will ever play of this dungeon crawl, you're gonna pull 1 entrance card from the deck and place it on the table, but then you're gonna pull 3 junctions, 4 passages, and 4 chambers. So chambers are basically always junctions plus 1, unless you have a hub, and then it's gonna be a hub actually counts as 2 junctions. So you're gonna have 1H plus 2 junction equals 5 chambers. And so here, this is just me trying to figure out how many chambers do you end up with X number of junctions? How many chambers do you end up with X number of junctions and Y number of hubs? And then I was like, okay, well, what would a bigger map look like? Let's say the normal standard mode of play is you draw 12 tiles. And then, so this would be an example of a 14 tile game. So this is slightly larger. It's got 4 junctions, and then 4 passages. And so passages just basically have 1 entrance and 1 exit. And so they don't terminate, but they don't offer a branch either. They just kind of extend gameplay, and hazards can happen along the way. And here, this particular map has 2 entrances. So I like the idea that some of the scenarios or some of the map configurations could actually have a second entrance. So maybe the goal of this scenario may just be like get through, find the other entrance, and get out the other side. Maybe it goes, maybe thematically or narratively, this goes through a mountain. So you're entering and then you're trying to get out. You could have rules that stack the deck so that the second entrance is like pretty far down in the deck. And then here's an example of an 18 tile dungeon. So this has 2 entrances, a hub, 4 junctions, 5 passages, and 6 chambers. So you can get a pretty large dungeon just on basically on a 5x5 tile grid, which is like 18 by 18 inches. Now, since the passages don't go off the center of each tile, there could be layout issues, and that's something I need to look into. Like, it may not be possible to lay all the tiles if I don't require corners to meet. So it could be, and I'll have this all figured out by the end of the month, but it could be that corners need to meet in order for all this to work. And unfortunately, I have a hunch that probably is the case. I was a little concerned that these dungeons just weren't big enough, but if you think about it, if each turn a character can only move, like, let's say 3 spaces, I think I decided that their movement range is going to be between 2 and 4, then they're basically moving about 1 tile or a little less per turn if all they're doing is moving, but they're going to be doing other stuff too. So, it would take like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns just to get here. And then they're going to go back to the junction, 6, 7, and then they're going to have to go back to the junction again, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, it's going to take 20 turns of movement just to get through here, plus another, 20 turns of exploration, combat. So I think even these small 12-tile dungeons are going to offer 45 to 60 minutes of play, and I'm kind of shooting for 60 to 90 minutes. So I'm not going to know until I get deep into the play testing on this stuff, but I actually think a 12-tile dungeon is going to be fairly robust and interesting. The other thing I was trying to decide was, do I want the map tiles to be generic and then have features procedurally, on little counters? Like let's say you have a chamber of bones. Do I want the bones to be baked into this tile and a title on this tile called, chamber of bones? Or do I want there to be a bone pile on a counter and then randomly place counters on these tiles to get the features? So, if I used counters for the features, then it's more procedural and there's more variation to the tiles, but then there's more assets, there's more counters, and I'm trying to reduce the amount of asset juggling that you have to do in order to play this game. So I don't really want this game to come with hundreds of counters. So it could be that I will end up baking the features into the tiles themselves. So this may just be the Chamber of Bones, and whenever you get this tile, you're dealing with the Chamber of Bones and whatever that means. So that's another type of question I'm wrestling with, is like, I could make this completely procedural, but it will just require a lot of assets, or I can find some middle ground. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's just a really long way of saying I'm just like jamming on this stuff. And then I've been slowly starting to do like bigger layouts, bigger versions of the tiles. So I'm taking these thumbnails and I'm turning them into this is like actual size. These are 3.5 inch tiles. And I don't think this is going to be the final art either, but I just want to figure out, okay, what are the tile descriptions? What kind of features are going to be baked into these tiles? And artistically, how am I going to pull it off? And then when I do the final tiles, I'll probably do them at 2x scale. I will draw them with pen and ink, or maybe watercolor wash, or maybe I'll just do them digitally. I haven't decided yet, but I'll do them at 2x, and then I'll shrink them down to 3.5 inch squares, and it'll kind of tighten up the detail and make it look better. So that's it. That's a really long way of saying that I'm just doing a bunch of game design and fantasy world engineering and having a lot of fun with it. So stay tuned.